Hello, my name is Melissa. If you are a woman that happens to go to any of the women's Bible studies, then we know each other. If not, hello, nice to see you. So glad you're here. I'm really excited about what we're going to go through today. I just need to apologize in advance if there is any background noise. My kids we're currently in Florida and I'm filming this and they're out in the pool so I can see them and film this at the same time. I have the door closed, so hopefully there's not a lot of noise, but I just went out there and said, can you guys please be just quiet for 7 minutes? No yelling, no screaming. And they said, so we're just gonna play Marco Polo then, is that okay? Like, no, that's the absolute worst thing you can do right now. So I said no, we'll see if they obey. But if you hear Marco Polo in the background, sorry about that. That's what's happening. So today we are going to look at a certain passage together. Luke 9:23 through 24 is the passage we're going to be looking at. If you could pull that up or have the Bible in front of you, that would be great. The other thing that would be helpful to have, if possible, is the document called Reading the Bible Normally. So maybe you have that in front of you. If so, that would be really helpful. And if you can't, that's okay. But just know that the document or the method that I'm going to be referencing is available through Riv at the document called Reading the Bible Normally. So you can always grab that later. And we call it's kind of a funny name, but we call it this because this method helps us to arrive at a proper or normal understanding of a verse or passage instead of taking it out of context and applying it in a way that is problematic. It's problematic because if we don't read a passage normally or correctly, then we can give it a meaning that God never intended it to have. And then when that meaning that we give it doesn't live up to our expectations, it can really shake or wreck our faith. But that's really just having faith in our own interpretation, not God's actual truth. And so it's important that we understand God's actual truth, because when we put our own meaning on them, that's when they can fail us, and it's really hard. But when we understand the real truth of this word, it will never fail us, and it can only serve to strengthen our faith. So to make sure that we're getting to the right type of reading, that's why we use this document. And it's just going to walk us through some steps to help us go through and make sure that we are getting a full and deep and true understanding of the verse or the passage or the book that we're reading. So there are 3 steps we're going to go through today in this verse. And I'm going to just show you an example of how it works, just using a couple of verses. We start with observation, then we do interpretation, and then we move on to application. And so let's start by reading Luke 9:23 through 24. Then he said to them all, and he here is Jesus. Jesus is talking. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. And then it does go on. I love the next verse too. So what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? And I mean, I could go on and on. The whole passage is amazing. So there are 3 steps: observation, interpretation, application. But before we do any of that, we start with prayer, because we're coming to God. We're coming to God's word, his words to us. And so before we even dive in, that's just something that is important to start with, and like be in that posture of hearing and listening and remembering that this is all about deepening our relationship with Christ, spending time with him. So even though it says only 3 steps, maybe it's 4, because that really is the first, and I would argue even most important step is just to have that position and that understanding that this is for developing our relationship with him and knowing him more. And so after that, we start with our observation. And this is just, we're not trying to even get to what it means, either for the original audience or for us. We're just taking time to observe what's written in the text and ask questions. So one way to do that is to ask the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. That can really help to get an understanding of the context of the verse that we're looking at. Also really good if you're studying through a whole book. That's always the absolute most important thing, to get the historical context and to know who was the original audience, who was the original author, what was the purpose, all of that. And so, but you can do the same thing for verses. So we're going to do that here. So the who, well, and we'll get to this a little bit later. The who is, if we look at who the author is that's writing this, is actually in all 4 of the Gospels. So we're looking at the one in Luke, but this verse shows up in all 4 Gospels, which shows you how important it is that all 4 Gospel writers included it. But the who's actually speaking it is Jesus. And then the people listening, the receivers, are the disciples in all of the Gospels. And then in some of the Gospels, it's also the crowds and just the common people that were listening. What? It's directions that Jesus is giving to his listeners. When? So the when is important because it's right. In most of the passages that we see it's coming right after Jesus predicts his death. So it's during his active ministry, but it is before he has actually himself gone to the cross. So that's good to keep in mind as we look at it, especially as he's talking about the cross, what that would have meant to the original listeners, not knowing the end story like we do. The where, one of the Gospels talks about that he said this at, I think it was Caesarea Philippi, and that was by the Sea of Galilee. So it was just in that area that he was active in his ministry. And then the why, well, I think we'll get to the why as we get to the interpretation and the application, but the why, obviously it was some instructions that Jesus thought was really important. So those were just some of the things that I went through. And then I had questions, like one of my first main questions was, where else do I see this in the Bible? That's called cross-reference. You look for cross-references and I found, I didn't actually know this. This is one of my favorite passages. It always has been since I was young. But I didn't actually know it was in all 4 of the Gospels. I've just never done a deep study of this before. So that was really cool to be like, oh, this is in all 4 of the Gospels. This is really important if it's repeated that many times. One of my questions was just like, yeah, what are some of these words mean exactly? Like, I know what they mean. I know what it means to deny, or I thought I knew what it means to deny. But what does it mean to actually take up your cross? Especially for those that, if they hadn't seen Jesus be crucified, didn't know at this time that they're hearing it, that he was going to be crucified. What did that mean to them? So that was one of my questions. How would they have understood the follow me? And then when it says save your life, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, lose your life, save it. Like what does that mean exactly? What is the save? What type of life are we saving here? What type of life are we giving up? So I wanted to do a deeper word study on those in the original language. So those were some of my questions. And then once I had thought through and also just take some time to let it marinate during my observation time. Best case scenario, if I have time, like for this one, I did know a week ahead that I was going to be filming this. And I thought, okay, I have a week to really think through this passage. So my first step of my observation was really days. It wasn't until just a few days ago that I started in on the thinking about the interpretation and observation, because I just wanted to pray on it and let it marinate and think through it. And then I moved on to the interpretation. And that's where I really started to dig into, okay, so what do those words mean? And there are a couple sources that I really like to go to for that. One is Bible Ref. It's an online commentary. It's the same people who Got Questions, and Got Questions is a website that Riv, I know, recommends a lot for answers to questions. Bible Ref is a commentary by the same people that does, I think, a really good job of explaining the meaning of things and how they fit into the larger picture. The other resource, I know those of you in Women's Bible Study have heard this a million times, but I love the Interlinear Bible. It is an online resource at Bible Hub. I think it's biblehub.com/interlinear, but I just find it by typing in whatever passage I'm looking at, like Luke 9 interlinear. So you can click on every single word in the passage and it will give you a full word study on all of those words. And it will also tell you where else in the Bible those words show up and commentary on it. And so just a whole lot of helpful helps on looking deeply at the words in the passage and getting to the true meaning of them. And so the words that I looked at for these were deny, take up the cross, and follow. And then I also looked at in verse 24, save and lose and save. I also had a lot of fun looking at this. This took me a while, but I just love language, and I really love looking at how language is structured and the type of literary device that Jesus used in the save and lose and save. So it was a reversal, but I'm pretty sure if there's any English people out there, but I think it is an antimetabole is what it's called, when you take the same words and then you reverse the order. And so I just think that's just so beautiful that God, as an amazing author as he is, and Jesus as this incredible teacher, used those literary devices. And also just very awesome how easy they are to remember, right? Like, I am not good at remembering scripture. It is something I really struggle with and try. But so I think maybe that's what it is too, is I appreciate Jesus making it so simple to remember these key points. And so I won't go into, for the sake of time, all of what I found in the word studies, but that is just what I did, is I looked at those words deeply. But one thing I'll share, for example, the word deny, if we consider how we pursue self-denial when we think about that, we might say, okay, well, that means I have to deny anything that I feel, anything that's coming from me. I have to completely deny that because that is myself and that is bad. I have to deny myself things. And so the Greek verb translated here to deny, I don't know how to pronounce it, but aparneomai, something like that. And so the word can simply mean to deny the truth of a statement. It always has the overtones of association or connection to a person. And so it's this idea of this disassociation from a relationship with a particular person. And so really what it means is denying ourselves, stepping away from our relationship with ourself as primary. Jesus is just basically saying, who are we most closely associated with? Is our primary allegiance to ourselves or to him, in a relational sense? And so for me, that was just helpful, I guess, is to think of like, I don't, sometimes I might think of that as like, well, I want that thing and that I need to deny myself that thing. But really it should be, where does that fit into my relationship with Christ? It's more about Christ than any of the things. And then also this interpretation point is where you can start looking at, I did say commentaries, but also just, we have so many incredible resources online with sermons and even seminary classes. I love listening to seminary classes on passages. You can just find all of these things. And so this is the time to really dive in and read that, and articles on these passages. And so then after we've spent all the time looking at, okay, what did it actually mean? What do these words mean? Then that's where we get to the application point and say, all right, so this is what Jesus was actually saying. This is what that word deny means. This is what take up your cross means, which I would encourage you, if you have time after this, to even talk about what does that mean, because look into that. Use the interlinear to look at take up your cross, because they hadn't seen Jesus actually do that, But that was a very common form. That was the primary form of crucifixion. And they would be very familiar with what that meant to, as someone who had been condemned, to then in your last and final moment have to carry your own instrument of crucifixion and carry it to your death. So that would be something that would be maybe good to talk about together afterwards. What does that mean? And so then as far as application, this is where you move it from what did it mean for them to what does that mean for me, or what does that mean for us today? Is this a descriptive passage? Is it something that is specific only to that certain time and situation? Or is it prescriptive? Is it universal in the meaning and in an application to everyone? That was actually one of my main questions during the observation. Like, I know he's saying this to these 12 disciples that are about to literally go out and die for him. Does that mean that it applies to me in the same exact way as to them? And I would come to no and yes. It does still apply to me and to us in how much I am willing to give and how much my allegiance should be to Christ over other things in my life. Is there a promise I can put my trust in, or a truth I can remember? Well, Jesus made it really easy in this passage because of that intimitably that makes it very easy to remember. Thank you, Jesus, for doing that. And so this is also the time where I really enjoy discussing this in community. After there's been this time to really marinate in it and get to the meaning, and then think about, okay, how do I need this to be applied to my life? And not just keeping it to myself, but talking about it with others, talking about it with those that know me, if there's something that needs to change. And I think there's something about processing it in community. And then also just doing something that can help me to remember it in my own daily life is the way that we apply it. Sometimes there's a command and a certain thing coming out of the verse that God does want me to do right then. And then I need to do that. I need to go out and take action from what I know is the truth. Sometimes it's just a truth to remember and just a continuous building on my understanding and my knowledge of him. And I would say always it ends, part of the application is a gratitude and a thankfulness to God for revealing this truth to us and being the kind of patient God that is always willing to teach us when we come to him humbly in this way, and is just unconditionally loving us and has given us these words that we can continue to be encouraged by and convicted by and strengthened by.